بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة والسلام على رسوله محمد وآله وصحبه أجمعين. اللهم انفعنا بما علمتنا وعلمنا ما ينفعنا وزدنا علما وعملا يا رب العالمين. Welcome to session 11 of the Islamic Institute of Scholarship's book reading course, The Historic Judgement on Interest by Mufti Taqi Usmani Hafidahullah Ta'ala. This week we'll start from paragraph 149. So Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. The real nature of money. The real nature of money, which should have been appreciated as a fundamental principle of the financial system, remained neglected for centuries, but it is now increasingly recognized by the modern economists. Professor John Gray of Oxford University, in his recent work, False Dawn, has remarked as follows. Most significantly, perhaps, transactions on foreign exchange markets have now reached the astonishing sum of around $1.2 trillion dollars a day, over 50 times the level of the world of trade. Around 95% of these transactions are speculative in nature, many using complex new derivatives, financial instruments based on futures and options. According to Michael Albert, the daily volume of transactions on the foreign exchange markets of the world holds some $900 billion. I think today that figure is actually, it might actually be in the trillions, actually. Equal to France's annual GDP back then, and some $200 million more than the total foreign currency reserves of the world's central banks. This virtual financial economy has a terrible potential for disrupting the underlying real economy, as seen in the collapse in 1995 of Earings, Britain's oldest bank. I think in the physical copy, there's a different name given for Britain's oldest bank. The size of, as in the physical copy of the book, yeah. So the size of derivatives mentioned by John Gray was, by the way, of their daily transactions. The size of their total worth, however, is much greater. It is mentioned by Richard Thompson in his Apocalypse Roulette in the following words. Financial derivatives have grown, more or less from starting in the early 1970s to a $64 trillion industry by 1996. So that's 64 followed by four sets of three zeros each. So 000 64 0000000000000. Perhaps that's a paycheck dream for many people. Unrealistic though. How do you imagine a number that big? You could say that if you laid all those dollar bills end to end, they would stretch from here to the sun 66 times, or to the moon 125,900 times. Imagine how thin a dollar bill is. And then if you stacked them back to back, uh, then you could go from here to the sun 66 times, or to the moon, from Earth to the moon 25,900 times. Wallahu a'lam. James Robertson observes in his latest work, Transforming Economic Life, in the following words. Today's money and financial system is unfair, ecologically destructive, and economically inefficient. The money must grow imperative, drives production and thus consumption to higher than necessary levels. It skews economic development towards money out of money, towards money out of money, and against providing real services and goods. It also results in a massive worldwide diversion of effort away from providing useful goods and services into making money out of money. At least 95% of the billions of dollars transferred daily around the world are for purely financial transactions, unlinked to transactions in the real economy. This is exactly what Imam al-Ghazali, rahmatullahi alayhi, had pointed out 900 years ago, from writing, from this time, right? The evil results of such an unnatural trade have been further explained by him at another place in the following words. Riba is prohibited because it prevents people from undertaking real economic activities. This is because when a person having money is allowed to earn more money on the basis of interest, either in spot or in deferred transactions, it becomes easy for him to earn without bothering himself to take pains in real economic activities. This leads to hampering the real interests of humanity, because the interests of humanity cannot be safeguarded without real trade, skills, industry, and construction. It seems that Imam al-Ghazali rahmatullahi alayhi had, in that early age, pointed out the phenomenon of monetary factors prevailing on production, creating a wide gap between the supply of money and the supply of real goods, which has emerged in the later days as the major cause of inflation. Almost the same terrible potential of trading in money as explained by Professor John Gray and James Robertson in their above extracts. We will examine this aspect a little later, but what is most important at this point is the fact that money, being a medium of exchange and a measure of value, cannot be taken as a production good which yields profit on a daily basis, as is presumed by the theories of interest. This is a mediator, and it should be left to play this executive role. It should to make it an object of profitable trade, it disturbs the whole monetary system and brings a plethora of economic and moral hazards to the whole society. The nature of loan. Paragraph 153. Another major difference between the secular capitalist and the Islamic principles is that under the former system, loans are purely commercial transactions meant to yield a fixed income to the lenders. Islam, on the other hand, does not recognize loans as income-generating transactions. They are meant only for those lenders who do not intend to earn a worldly return through them. They are meant only for those lenders who do not intend to earn a worldly return through them. They are meant for those lenders who do not intend to earn a worldly return through them. They instead lend their money either on humanitarian grounds to achieve a reward in the hereafter, or merely to save their money through a safer hand. So as far as investment is concerned, there are several other modes of investment like partnership, etc., which may be used for that purpose. The transactions of loan are not meant for earning income. The transactions of loan are not meant for earning income. The basic philosophy underlying this scheme is that the one who is offering his money to another person has to decide whether A, he is lending money to him as a sympathetic act, or B, he is lending money to the borrower so that his principal may be saved, or C, he is advancing his money to share the profits of the borrower. In the former two cases, A and B, where he's lending money out of sympathy or so that his principal, his ru'usul mal, is saved, he is not entitled to claim any additional amount over and above the principal. Because in A, he has offered financial assistance to the borrower on humanitarian grounds or any other sympathetic considerations. And in B, his sole purpose is to save his money. and not to earn any extra income. However, if his intention is to share the profits of the borrower, as in the last case, case C, he shall have to share his loss also, so the profit loss sharing, if he suffers a loss. In this case, his objective cannot be served by a transaction of loan. He will have to undertake a joint venture with the opposite party, whereby both of them will have a joint stake in the business and will share its outcome on a fair basis. Conversely, if the intent of sharing the profit of the borrower is designed on the basis of an interest-based loan, it will mean that the financier wants to ensure his own profit while he leaves the profit of the borrower at the mercy of the actual outcome of the business. There may be a situation where the business of the borrower, it might all fail. It's likely, isn't it? If it's a startup, for example, I don't mean to discourage anybody who's perhaps got an idea for a startup. May Allah grant us barakah and success and sincerity. But let's say, but it's well known, it is known that a large portion of startups might fail, right? That might be because perhaps the focus is wrong. Yeah, I'm not necessarily talking about what product they're after. Perhaps how they're approaching their business might be wrong. That might be the reason for why a startup fails. Although that's my humble opinion. Not necessarily universal, but maybe in some cases. Um, but yes, let's say the borrower totally fails. In this situation, he will not only bear the whole loss of the business, but he will also have to pay interest to the lender, meaning thereby that the profit or interest of the financier is guaranteed at the price and the destructive loss of the borrower, which is obviously a glaring injustice. Because uh remember well because now he's not got an income, now that his whatever was invested in has failed, he's now got this loss to deal with. He might have to cover some sort of the losses of uh whatever he missed out on, perhaps materials or something, whatever else. But then if there's a financier who's charged him interest, now he has to also stress that how am I going to pay this person who's now demanding that I pay him money, but not only that, he's demanding that I pay him interest as well, na'udhu billah. So this is obviously a glaring injustice. On the other hand, if the business of the owner borrower earns huge profits, let's say it's successful, the financier should have shared in the profit in reasonable proportion. But what would happen in the other scenario? But in an interest-based system, the profit of the financier is restricted to a fixed rate of return, which is governed by the forces of supply and demand of money and not on the actual profits produced on the ground. So there's a bit of a flip in the situation. We see that if there's a loss for the borrower, unfortunately, then um, he's going to have injustice against him, that he has to then deal with the interest. And then you have it where if he does do well, then unfortunately the financier can't, the financier, his profits are restricted and he can't share the profits of what he invested in with the borrower. Allahu a'lam. So, thus, financing a business. So, this is while the financier gets much less than deserved by his input in the business. So, this rate of interest, may be much less than the reasonable proportion of a financier might have deserved, had it been a joint venture. In this case, the major part of the profit is secured by the borrower, while the financier gets much less than deserved by his input in the business, which is another form of injustice. This rate of interest may be much less than the reasonable proportion a financier might have borrowed had it been a joint venture. In this case, the major part of the profit is secured by the borrower, while the financier gets much less than deserved by his input in the business, which is another form of dhulm, just injustice. Thus, financing a business on the basis of interest creates an unbalanced atmosphere. That's the key here. I'm going to highlight that. Which so there's an unbalanced atmosphere whichever way you take it. If the borrower is successful, then you've got an unbalanced atmosphere. Why? Because the financier he's oppressing the borrower. But then if you have a successful borrower, then okay, fine, he's successful, but then we see that there's an injustice in the way that the profits are being distributed. So in the first scenario, there's a problem with the loss. In the second scenario, there's a problem with the profit distribution. That's why Islam has profit loss sharing. It's a very common term in Islamic finance. Thus, financing a business on the basis of interest creates an unbalanced atmosphere, which has the potential of bringing injustice to either of the two parties in different situations. That is the wisdom for which the Sharia did not approve of an interest-based loan as a form of financing. Once the interest is banned, the role of loans in commercial activities becomes very limited, and the whole financing structure turns out to be equity-based and backed by real assets. In order to limit the use of loans, the Sharia has permitted to borrow money only in cases of dire need, and has discouraged the practice of incurring debts for living beyond one's means or to grow one's wealth. One shouldn't take out a debt just so that one can grow his wealth or that one can live beyond his means. You might see people, with fancy cars, with a nice big house, a Roman house, a nice big estate home. But you think that you might think that they're living comfortably, but in reality, they're finding it hard to sleep at night, thinking of all the debt that they've collated and all the debt that they have that they probably will collate, and if somehow they have to conjure up a way, of trying to pay off all of that. So never wish that, I'm this, I wish I was this person or another person. Yes? Converse, so once the interest is banned, the role of loans in commercial activities becomes very limited. And the whole financing structure turns out to be equity-based and backed by real assets. In order to limit the use of loans, the Sharia has permitted to borrow money only in cases of dire need, as I mentioned. And we don't take out loans. We strictly do not take out loans for living beyond our means because my neighbor has a fancy car, I want a fancy car, I need to take out a loan. No, that's not permissible. Oh, the only way for me to increase my wealth to have this certain margin within 6 months is if I take out a loan. Not permissible. Not permissible. The well-known event that the Prophet ﷺ, he actually refused to offer janazah salah over a person who died indebted, was in fact to establish the principle that incurring debt, having a debt, should not be taken as a natural or ordinary phenomenon of life. When a person passes away, And if he has a debt, may Allah Ta'ala pardon us, may Allah Ta'ala have mercy on us so that we don't do this action ever again. But if a person that we don't do this ever again, when a person passes away, their and once they've passed away, their debt actually circles around their head, and it's a very, very, very grave issue that we need to address, and we need to not just address it, we need to actually reform the situation. So, just a point here. Think of that of course the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, he is a loving prophet, the most merciful prophet. Yes. Well, he was the most merciful of the people. Think now, who is he going to be doing janazah salah for? Obviously a Muslim. And what do you call a Muslim who followed Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam at the time, during his lifetime? As in, with there are other criteria that they saw in Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. Of course, they're Sahaba. It's a Sahabi. So Allah knows best, but perhaps such a person, even though he was a Sahabi of Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, he had debt that was unpaid of. So Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam would refuse to pray his janazah salah. Maybe someone else would come along and do it, but Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam himself, of course, setting an example, he has to be the one to emphasize the importance of debt, that why it's a bad thing, as in why it's something that we have to avoid as much as possible. Even Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, he had a dua. اللهم إني أعوذ بك من الهم والهزن والعجز والكسل والجبن والبخل وضلع الدين وقهر الرجال. ضلع الدين, we might see in other riwayat, there's about maybe, to my knowledge, maybe 6 riwayat of this dua. ضلع الدين, انقلبت الدين, قهر الدين, and then there's other wordings in the other riwayat that are different. But is talking about the overpowering of debt. That's what's mentioned. I've seen in the translation that that Allah subhanahu that you meant to that you seek refuge in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala from the overpowering of debt. Yes. So it's not something to take lightly. It's not really something to take lightly. Now, it should be the last thing to be resorted to in the course of economic activities. And of course, you could ask Allah by His name, Al-Mughni, the Enricher, Al-Ghani, the Self-Sufficient, Ar-Razzaq, the Provider. In fact, I think I've mentioned this before, that rizq, the word rizq, yes, it can refer to multiple things. It doesn't mean wealth. It can refer to wealth. It can refer to ilm, Islamic knowledge. It can refer to um, friends. Rizq in and of itself, the word in and of itself, linguistically means something that's unexpected. Something that's unexpected. That's what rizq literally means. Yes, it's valid to say that razaqa means to provide, but in reality, the word rizq, raza, and qaf, it actually means something which is unexpected. Now, this is one of the reasons. So it should be resorted to taking a debt should be resorted to in the course of economic activities, and that is a debt that doesn't have interest. Okay, that doesn't have interest on it. This is one of the reasons for which interest has been prohibited, because given the prohibition of interest, no one will be agreeable to advance a loan without a return for unnecessary expenses of the borrower or for his profitable projects. It will leave no room for unnecessary expenses incurred through loans. The profitable ventures, on the other hand, will be designed on the basis of equitable participation, and thus the scope of loans will remain restricted to a narrow circle. Conversely, once the interest, is allowed, and advancing loans in itself becomes a form of profitable trade, the whole economy turns into a debt-oriented economy, which not only dominates over the real economic activities and disturbs its natural functions by creating frequent shocks. We've seen the Great Depression in 1939, around 1930, in the 1920s, I think it was, or 1930s. I think it was the 1930s. I think I might have mentioned that last time. That's actually some investigation went into that, and it was found that that was actually uh, linked to causes, or the causes were linked to interest. So there's a strong influence of interest on that. We might have actually mentioned it previously. And of course, the GFC in 2008, the main issue was interest, definitely. Yeah, the people take these, what was it, subprime loans and things like this. So the whole economy turns into a debt-oriented economy, which not only dominates over the real economic activities and disturbs its natural functions by creating frequent shocks, but also puts the whole of mankind under the slavery of debt. One of my teachers, he has a saying. Um, he made a saying, A debt-free life, a debt-free life is a stress-free life. A debt-free life is a stress-free life. So a debt-free life is a stress-free life. Okay? It will leave, think now, like it is no secret that all the nations of the world, including the developed countries like the UK, America, the United States, Canada, you've got, yeah, Australia, all these different countries, they're drowned in national and foreign debts to the extent, and maybe not all the nations of the world. I think there's only three. Allah knows best. Allah knows best. Whether it's all the nations of the world, it may even be Mufti Taqi Usmani, Hafidahullah Ta'ala, was speaking about the situation at the time. Um, but I don't know if all the nations of the world are subject to interest. According to him, it is no secret that all the nations of the world, including the developed countries, are drowned in national and foreign debts to the extent that the amount of payable debts in a large number of countries exceeds their total income. Just to take one example of the UK, the household debt in 1963 was less than 30% of total annual income. In 1997, however, the percentage of household debt rose up to more than 100% of the total income. It means that the incomes of the it means that the household debt throughout the country, throughout the UK, embracing rich and poor alike, represents more than the entire gross annual incomes of the country. Consumers have borrowed and made purchases against their future earnings. an instant gratitude um, approach. They made purchases which are actually against their future earnings, equivalent to more than the entirety of their annual incomes. Peter Warburton, one of the UK's most respected financial commentators and a past winner of economic forecasting awards, has commented on this situation as follows. The credit and capital markets have grown too rapidly. They've grown too rapidly with too little transparency and accountability. Prepare for an explosion that will rock the Western financial system to its foundation. And thinking that this was before the GFC, perhaps the GFC was what Peter Warburton might have been warning of. Wallahu a'lam. Wallahu al-muwaffiq. Of course, Peter can't tell the future, but he's just estimating that, okay, based on this, it looks as if it's going to go this way. And perhaps if, as he mentioned, prepare for an explosion that will rock the Western financial system to its foundation, that probably sounds like the GFC of 2008. Allah knows best. So now we're going to move on to the overall effects of interest. We're actually quite well through the book now, so uh, based on the this online edition in front of you, we're on page 43 out of 64. So, and we started maybe June right now, so in January we started. This video has been taken, is currently in June, so we started in January. So it's not long, hopefully, till we finish. We could finish maybe around October time, maybe. So anyway, interest-based loans have a persistent tendency in favor of the rich and against the interests of the common people. Not even just the poor people, but the common people. It carries adverse effects on production and allocation of resources, as well as on the distribution of wealth. This is a very interesting statement because if you think about what what we might be told commonly as being the basic objective of economics, I've mentioned this before. That is to allocate finite resources against infinite wants. Obviously, that's impossible. So maybe economics wants to reevaluate its purpose. But even let's say hypothetically we take on that example, let's say I wouldn't say achievable, it's still impossible. But let's say we just go ahead with that. Now think of this statement now that economists today, there are some economists probably out there who are actively trying to achieve this so-called objective of allocating finite resources with infinite wants. But at the same time, they might advocate for interest, which carries, as it says here, adverse effects on production and allocation of resources, as well as on the distribution of wealth. So it's a bit problematic because on one hand, we're trying to do one thing, and on the other hand, we're trying to do the other thing, which is charging, allowing for interest, and then that's attacking the work that we're trying to do on the other hand, which is allocating finite resources. Forget the infinite wants part. People will might just continue wanting infinite wants. Uh, but just generally, whatever we have in front of us, allocating finite resources to that, then how are you going to achieve that or even progress if you're promoting interest, you're facilitating interest within your economy, and that's attacking your production and allocation of the resources that you already have, and on the distribution of the wealth, which is another resource. So there's a bit of a conflict over here. It's a bit of yeah, conflict. So A, evil effects on allocation of resources. Now we're going to explain this. We're going to explain why is it a problem for the allocation of resources. Loans in the present banking system are advanced mainly to those who, on the strength of their wealth, can offer satisfactory collateral. Mr. Umar Chopra, senior economic advisor to the Saudi Arabian Monetary Agency, who appeared in this case as a jurisconsult, has summarized the effects of this practice in the following words. Dr. Umar, he said, credit therefore tends to go to those to those who, according to Lester Thera, are, quote, lucky rather than smart or meritocratic. The banking system thus tends to reinforce the unequal distribution of capital. Even Morgan Guarantee Trust Company, the sixth largest bank in the US, has admitted that the banking system has failed to, quote, finance either maturing smaller companies or venture capitalists and, quote, though awash with funds, is not encouraged to deliver competitively priced funding to any but the largest, most cash-rich companies. Hence, while deposits come for a broader cross-section of the population, their benefit mainly goes to the rich. And this is from Dr. Chapra's written statement under the caption, Why has Islam prohibited interest, on page 18. 106, paragraph 163, the veracity of this statement can be confirmed by the fact that according to the statistics issued by the State Bank of Pakistan in September 1999, they said that 9,269 account holders out of 2,184,417. So so putting that into perspective, 9,269 out of 2,184,417 accounts, only 0.4243% of total account holders have utilized 438.67 billion rupees, which is 64.5% of the total advances as of the end of December 1998. Evil effects on production. Since in an interest-based system, funds are provided on the basis of strong collateral, and the end use of the funds does not constitute the main criterion for financing. It encourages people to live beyond their means. So, since in an interest-based system, funds are provided on the basis of strong collateral, and the end use of the funds do not constitute criterion for financing. It encourages people to live beyond their means. So whatever, oh, okay, you want money, okay, as long as you can, the collateral and of course there's potential for you to pay that back. No, it's fine. You can finance whoever you want with the money that we give you. There's no criteria. The purpose, unfortunately, um, isn't taken into consideration as to why this person wants the money. Sometimes maybe, but I don't know how likely it is. The rich people do not borrow for productive projects only, but also for conspicuous consumption. Similarly, governments borrow money not only for genuine development programs, but also for their lavish expenditure and for projects motivated by their political ambitions rather than based on sound economic assessment. Non-project related borrowings, which were possible only in an interest-based system, have thus helped in nothing but increasing the size of our debts to a horrible extent. According to the budget of 1998 to 1999 of Pakistan, that is, in our country, as in Pakistan, 46% of the total government spending is devoted to debt servicing, while only 18% is allocated for development, which includes education, health, and infrastructure. Clearly, the people aren't the first priority, even though it's the people who are meant to they're the main focus. It's their welfare. It's uh, not Pakistan's image or this and that we should be look luxurious. This is wrong. Okay. Essentially, what I mean to say is that the people are being neglected. Maybe not entirely, but there is more that could have been done for them. Wallahu a'lam. Yeah. So the evil effects on distribution. We have already pointed out that when business is financed on the basis of interest, it may bring injustice either to the borrower if he suffers a loss, or to the financier if the debtor earns huge profits. Although both situations are equally possible in an interest-based system, and there are many examples where the payment of interest has brought total ruin to the small traders, yet in our present banking system, the injustice brought to the financier is more pronounced and much more disturbing to the equitable distribution of wealth. In the context of the modern capitalist system, it is the banks which advance depositors' money to the industrialists and traders. Almost all the giant business ventures are mostly financed by the banks and financial institutions. In numerous cases, the funds deployed by the big entrepreneurs from their own pocket are much less than the funds borrowed by them from the commercial people through banks and financial institutions. If the entrepreneurs, having only 10 million of their own, acquire 90 million from the banks and embark on a huge profitable enterprise, it means that 90% of the projects is created by the money of the depositors, while only 10% was generated by their own capital. If these huge projects bring enormous profits, only a small portion of interest, which normally ranges between 2 to 10% in different countries, will go to the depositors whose input in the projects was 90%, while all the rest will be secured by the big entrepreneurs whose real contribution to the projects was not more than 10%. Even this small proportion given to the depositors is taken back by these big entrepreneurs because all the interest paid by them is included in the cost of their production and comes back to them through the increased prices. The net result in this case is that all the profits of the big enterprises is earned by the persons whose own financial input did not exceed 10% of the total investment, while the people whose their financial contribution was as high as 90% get nothing in real terms. Because the amount of interest given to them is often repaid by them through the increased prices of the products. And therefore, in a number of cases, the return received by them becomes negative in real terms. While this phenomenon is coupled with the fact already mentioned that 64.5% of total advances went only to 0.42 0.43% of total account holders. It means that the profits generated mostly by the money of millions of people went almost exclusively to 9,269 borrowers. Allahu Akbar. One can imagine how far the interest-based borrowings have contributed to the horrible inequalities found in our system of distribution, and how great is the injustice brought by the modern commercial interest to the whole of society as compared to the interest charged on the old consumption loans that affected only some individuals. How the present interest based system works to favor the rich and kill the poor is succinctly explained by James Robertson in the following words. He said the pervasive role of interest in the economic system results in the systematic transfer of money from those who have less to those who have more. Again, this transfer of resources from poor to rich has been made shockingly clear by the Third World debt crisis, but it applies universally. It is partly because those who have more money to lend get more in interest than those who have less. It is partly because those who have less often have to borrow more, and it is partly because the cost of interest repayments now forms a substantial element in the cost of all goods and services. And the necessary goods and services looms much larger in the finances of the rich. When we look at the monetary system that way, and when we begin to think about how it should be redesigned to carry out its functions fairly and efficiently as part of an enabling and conserving economy, the argument for an interest-free, inflation-free money system for the 21st century seems to be very strong. The same author, James Robertson, in another book comments as follows. The transfer of revenue from poor people to rich people, from poor places to rich places, and from poor countries to rich countries by the money and finance system is systematic. One cause of the transfer of wealth from poor to rich is the way interest payments and receipts work through the economy. And we've got some wonderful statistics coming up, but I think we'll leave it there for today, inshallah. So we've covered quite some interesting points. Now focusing on, it's quite interesting that we're now looking at economics, its objective, and we're seeing a conflict between the effect of interest and the objective of economics. Well, the current objective of economics, because even that's subjective. But right now it's deemed perhaps as the allocation of finite resources to infinite wants, which is impossible technically speaking. But we see that interest is even harming the production and allocation of resources and the distribution of wealth. May Allah Ta'ala grant us understanding. Apologies, today started a bit later. But we're stopping now, inshallah. Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdika ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.